Who's catching the football from Josh Hoover in 2024? We're going to reset that receiver room, tell you about all the movement and where the roster stands going into the summer and into fall camp. That's coming up next here on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe to the YouTube channel or on your favorite podcast platform. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. You can find me on Twitter at SimcoxSteven. We're talking about the roster right now, and the TCU wide receivers is the room that we're going to take a deeper look at today. So I've had an idea for this series. I started a couple days ago with the defensive backs. There's so much movement now in college football in the two portal windows. Who transferred in? Who transferred out? What do the freshmen look like going into the season? Who are the main returning players? We're going to break down each position group. Some won't really take a whole segment, right? We pretty much know what the quarterback room is going to look like with Josh Hoover as your starter, Ken Seals, and then true freshman Haas Haney behind him. Running back, just because you don't have a ton of guys on the roster, is a similar situation. But in the receiver room, there has been a good amount of movement. And I don't want to fall into the trap of – last year, I was really excited about the roster. I thought TCU did a good job of finding players that should have been high-impact guys in the portal. At least on paper, it looked like they're coming from big-time schools, maybe dealt with some injuries or other situations, but had the type of talent that TCU didn't typically bring in. And I think Sonny Dykes talked about this. I went over – he did an interview with 365 Sports a few days ago. In yesterday's episode, I kind of recapped some of the things he said and gave my feedback on it. But one thing that was pretty clear in the transfer portal this year, it seems like they made an effort to go get guys who had playing experience at the college football level, and availability was a big part of that. They went and got players who had been available at their previous stops. I think they also made it a priority to go find guys who are hungry and who fit the type of culture and attitude they're trying to bring to that locker room. Because last season was a total miss. From an urgency standpoint, I thought they'd be more focused. I thought they'd be more ready. I thought there'd be a much better and hungry mentality, and that never materialized. I think it sort of did towards the end of the season after they fell on their face and had a quarterback change and some other things get shaken up. But for the most part, they didn't look like a team that was out there to prove that 2 years ago was not a fluke. And so I'm very interested in what this year looks like. But last offseason, I spent a lot of time talking about the depth and the talent on the roster and how I thought it was going to be really good and they're going to be a great football team. And so I've tried to be wary of falling into that similar preseason hype this year. But I got to say, I really like this wide receiver room. I know there's one frequent listener and YouTube viewer who's commented this multiple times. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on their name right now. But they've said they don't think there's enough players at the wide receiver position who can really stretch the field, like a Quentin Johnston, right? And that was such a huge part of the offense with Max Duggan, is that downfield passing game. That was pretty non-existent last year. A lot of their big plays were running after the catch, like short throws, and then whether it was Jared Wiley or John Paul Richardson, breaking a tackle, getting up the field. Savion Williams did it a few times as well. The traditional vertical passing game, though, was pretty absent. And while I think that's a slight concern, now they're bringing in Eric McAllister, and there's a lot of pressure on him to sort of take that role on. And I'm hopeful that Savion Williams, with another year working with Josh Hoover, should have better timing, better communication, better chemistry. And Savion's a guy who can go get a 50-50 ball in a way that a lot of players can't just because of his frame and his size. I'm hopeful that will open up the downfield passing game. They also have some guys in the slot who are just explosive and have a ton of speed. But let's get to it, breaking down the roster itself. So players that transferred in. Eric McAllister, who I mentioned a moment ago, from Boise State, 873 yards receiving in 10 games, 5 touchdowns, had some huge games against San Jose State, Fresno State, had over 200 yards against San Jose State last year, averaged about 18 yards a catch, is 6'2", 200 pounds, your prototypical outside wide receiver. Eric McAllister and Savion Williams, who we'll get to later on, he's the guy that's returning. They are being asked to be the dudes. Like, those are the guys that if you're going to have a dominant wide receiver in this group, it's going to be those two players. And one thing I brought up last season, I really feel like your go-to guy, like you can have possession wide receivers, dudes that move the sticks, and in some ways guys that can make things happen after the catch in the slot. And that can be a huge part of your offense. But you really need a go-to wide receiver on the outside. And towards the end of the year, Savion showed some of that, but it wasn't consistent. Eric McAllister was that dude at Boise State last season. And so they're expecting him to be the guy on the outside that can go up, make big plays, take the top off the defense, and just be a consistent threat to move the ball down the field and push the vertical passing game this upcoming season. They also added Braylon James, former 4-star recruit in high school. He spent one season at Notre Dame, didn't really see much playing time there. Braylon James, in my mind, is your Cordell Russell replacement. Now, they're different players. Braylon also, though, is tall at 6'4", and can go up and make plays and was really explosive as a high school player. But young player with a lot of promise, high ceiling. Not sure how much he'll be involved in the offense this year. I think if he is involved in the offense this year, that's a big plus. It seems like this was more of a projection for the next couple of seasons, though. It's a good pickup, however. I think it's the type of – if you're talking about guys that don't have a lot of experience that you want to go get in the portal, this is the type of player you want. Still has multiple years of eligibility left. Okay, went to South Bend. It didn't work out. Just kind of gets a chance to get a fresh start somewhere else, be closer to home, be with his former teammate in Cam Cook. All those things are going to be positive. So Braylon James is a name to know as he makes his way here to TCU's campus and tries to kind of restart his college career after spending one season in Notre Dame. The two freshmen, true freshmen that I want to mention, Jakyle Baker, the 4-star wide receiver to Brownsboro, who was the highest ranked player in this 2024 class for the Frogs. Now, one thing I'll say about Baker, he wasn't enrolled early, so it wasn't at spring camp. That might set him back a little bit. A few years back, now Quentin Johnston, different type of dude, I know, but he missed spring practice. I guess they didn't really have spring practice because he came in during that COVID shortened year. But he did not enroll early, and then they kind of had an abbreviated weird fall camp because of COVID, and he still stepped in right away and was an impact player. I think of all the positions, wide receiver is one where you should be able to pick up the offense quickly, learn your responsibilities, and be able to play in a hurry. But I did want to say, like, that might set Kyle back, at least for this year, not moving forward, but just for this season, getting a fresh start or a good start with a very deep wide receiver room. Also, Duzi Ezukama, Eric Ezukama's brother. He was enrolled early in the spring, heard his name a few times. It seems like he made some plays. So those are your two true freshmen that will be coming in this year as well. As far as guys they lost and transferred out, Cordell Russell went to Colorado. It stinks that he left. I mean, I know there were some questions about did he understand the offense well enough, but there were also a ton of you that were constantly asking me, why is Cordell Russell on the field? And I didn't have a great answer for you. I mean, my guess is that he just wasn't showing up and, showing up well in practice and playing well in practice. And so that's why he wasn't hitting the field. But, we'll see what he does. I wish him the best. I hope it works out for him in Colorado, except when he plays TCU. Seems like there was a rift, though, between him and the staff, and it resulted in him not getting playing time on a team last season where, at least especially towards the end of the year, it felt like if you showed some promise and showed some ability, you could have and should have been on the field because it wasn't like, they were lighting the world on fire. Also lost DJ Allen to UTSA. DJ was a talented guy that they were excited about coming out of high school, just never really saw the field, kind of got buried behind a lot of different guys. And then also Rohan Llewellyn, do everything kid from Gilmer. One thing I do wonder, and Byron Bailey, who listens to the show frequently, mentioned this once. I think at wide receiver and defensive back, for young guys, it's really tough because there's always going to be a lot of those players in the portal, experienced players in the portal that actually have production at their last stop. And I think for coaches, it's tempting, and in a lot of ways, it's easier to just say, well, if I can go get this guy who had 500 yards at school X last season, as opposed to continuing to develop, what we got on campus, then maybe we'll be better next year, or maybe he'll just be more ready to play next year. Now, I think ultimately, if you're going to win championships and be a contender, you have to develop the guys that you have. But I think, especially for defensive backs and wide receivers, it's just really easy to get buried in the depth chart because there's going to be a constant churn of different guys coming in and out and experienced players that they find in the transfer portal. And so you lost 3 players, one of those in Cordell Russell, who was really highly rated coming out of high school, but it just seems like it never worked once he got to campus and got in at TCU and was working himself in practice. Guys coming back. Savion Williams, he's going to be a dude. I really hope he can put it all together this season. Last year, the start of the year was super inconsistent, but it did feel like he really came into his own as the year went on. And I think the quarterback change was good for him for whatever reason. He just seemed to really respond well once Josh Hoover took the field. Jack Besh, that's a name to know. Sonny Dykes said he was the best offensive player in camp. And, he was a freshman All-American at LSU, had high expectations last year, was banged up a lot, didn't play as much as we thought. I'm very curious to see how they use him. He's kind of a wide receiver, H-back, tight end type. So I think there's a lot of creative ways and different things that they can do in the way that they line him up and the way that they put him on the football field. And he could be a factor for this team this upcoming season. John Paul Richardson, team's best receiver last year, super consistent, always caught the ball, can make things happen after the catch. He'll be your slot guy going into the year. JoJo Earl, another player that had super high expectations, seemed like he started to kind of get a feel for what he was supposed to do later in the season. And I'm hopeful that maybe JoJo can be more a factor on special teams. I thought he was going to be a big-time player on the return game, and that just didn't really happen. Special teams was also sort of a mess this past season. Jordan Bailey and Major Everhart, both explosive players who we expect again to see in that slot receiver position. Sonny Dykes did have some good things to say about both those guys during spring camp, that he just felt like they had a much better understanding of the offense and they looked like different players after having a year in the system. Blake Newell, who's been around for a while, and I think will be someone who rotates in and out of the outside receiver spot. Chase Jackson, another name to know. Hasn't seen the field a lot in his first few seasons, but he is back. Dalen Wright, that's a big wild card too. There's a ton of talent there, and when he was healthy last year, he was a factor. But the question with Dalen his entire career has been whether or not he's available. I remember when he transferred, and I reached out to Kane Robb, who hosts the Locked On Golden Gophers show, Minnesota show. And he was like, listen, man, as far as talent and ability goes, Dalen was one of those dudes. All the other guys were talking about him, the things that he would do in practice, the things he could do on the football field. He has special ability, but it was just always about whether or not he was going to be on the field. And so I'm always cautious about guys that aren't available. And it's not his fault. I understand injuries. Nobody wants to be injured. There's only so much injury prevention you can do. But that's kind of been his career so far. But maybe this is the season where everything comes together and he's a factor in this upcoming year. So those are your wide receivers for 2024. And again, I like the different types of players they have in that room. I think there's a lot of different dudes who could step up and be super productive. I feel like there's some guys coming back who are proven commodities like Eric McAllister, Savion Williams, J.P. Richardson. And then there's some guys that if it all clicks this year, if it clicks for JoJo Earl or Major Everhart, or if Dalen Wright can stay healthy, if Jack Besh is healthier and is a bigger factor in this offense this upcoming season, then there's a number of players who could potentially be very good for the Horned Frogs in 2024 at the wide receiver spot. I think this team is set at the skill positions. A lot of it's going to come down to the trenches, which we'll get to in the coming days and weeks here on Locked On Horned Frogs. When we come back, TCU basketball, both the men and women doing a lot of work in the portal. We'll rank the transfers, the top 5 basketball transfers so far. That's coming up next here on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. How about Luka Doncic last night? My goodness. Coming off a horrible game in Game 4, just takes over in Game 5 and leads the Mavericks to a pivotal victory in that Game 5 to take a 3-2 lead on the Thunder. You can bet on the NBA playoffs on FanDuel, and you can make sure that your first bet is a winning bet by going to FanDuel.com/lockedon. New customers, you place one $5 bet, win or lose, you get $150 in bonus bets. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. Just put a bet down at FanDuel.com/lockedon or on the FanDuel app. NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs, NFL over-unders, win totals, schedule was released yesterday, so make sure you check that out. FanDuel, official betting partner of the NBA and proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. So it's been kind of quiet for Mark Campbell and the women's basketball team lately. They had a flurry of commits a few weeks ago in the transfer portal, but they did add someone a few days ago that I hadn't gotten around to mentioning, Deasia Merrill from Georgia State. This is a post player. She's 6'1". Last season, she averaged 8 points and 7 rebounds per game. She's been at Georgia State for 4 years, and she's done a nice job there. I think more than anything, this is someone who can help out Sedona Prince. She did a couple years ago, averaged 13 points a game. The last 2 seasons, she's averaged between 8 or 10 points a game. So she can score the basketball a little bit, good rebounder. And, you know, it's pretty clear, and we'll get to this in a second, what they're trying to do. They're surrounding Sedona Prince with great shooters and great shot creators. And Merrill can be either someone who comes in and gives Prince a break at that 5 spot, or if they want to go to a taller lineup where, you know, they have better rim protection, she can come in the game as well. So Mark Campbell continuing to add talent to that TCU basketball roster as they get ready for year 2 of his tenure. But I wanted to do this. I wanted to rank the top 5 transfers, both the women's and men's. So we'll do 5 through 1, not for each team individually, but just of all the transfers that have committed on both sides, which ones will have the biggest impact on their respective teams this season. So I'll start at number 5, and I went back and forth. I'm going to go with Maddie Shear from Kentucky. And Maddie was actually the first commit in the portal for Mark Campbell this offseason. Past year, she averaged 12.5 points a game and did a really nice job for the Wildcats, was leading their offense, 3.5 assists, almost 5 rebounds, shot 33% from the field, about 30% from 3. And she can run this offense. I think she can play the 2 guard, or she can be the point guard. The guard play is going to get so much better under Mark Campbell this upcoming season than it was last year. Now, the person that I was debating along with Maddie Shear was Donovan Hunter. And maybe I'm missing Donovan's impact because she was the starting point guard on an Oregon State team that went to the Elite 8 last year. But she averaged 6.8 points per game, almost 4 assists per game, shot 41% from the field. Another player that can just shoot the lights out. And again, they're trying to space the floor and, you know, use that spread pick and roll system with Sedona Prince running with all these guards. But I ended up going with Shear because she's been a proven commodity for a few years as a shot creator, someone who can get buckets and should be able to help lead this offense. And I'm really excited with all the guards coming in for what this means for Madison Connor. Because last season, as the year went on, you could tell teams just started face guarding her. And they were like, listen, she can shoot the 3. She's a big-time scorer. If we can take her out of the game, then they don't have other players in the backcourt that can, you know, do what she can do. And it showed, especially once Prince went down and Connor was banged up as well. And so it was a tough road for her. But I think she's going to get a lot more open looks, and she's a great spot-up shooter. She can also shoot off the dribble. So adding these players should be really good for her as well. At number 4, I'm going to go with Frankie Collins, the point guard from Arizona State. He'll be joining Jamie Dixon's squad. Frankie has a lot of experience. He played at Michigan and then transferred over to the Sun Devils a few years ago, averaged about 14 points a game last year. Now, he wasn't super efficient in averaging those 14 points a game. Shooting percentage hit a pretty big dip, 31% from 3. He shot 42% from the field, which is not horrible. But I think Frankie is at his best when he's running the offense and not being asked to score, even though he can do that. And that's the hope by bringing in a few other players that I'll mention here in a minute. But someone who is a steady presence at that point guard spot the basketball team this year, because about middle of the season last year, teams just started blitzing TCU's guards on pick and rolls, and they really didn't have an answer for how to solve it. And it was a big problem throughout the season. So I think the biggest thing that Collins can bring to the table is just a steady veteran presence at that point guard position. At number 3, Noah Reynolds, 20 points a game last year at Green Bay, a great shooter. Also had 4.5 assists, was not afraid to pass the basketball. 34% from 3, shot 41% from 3 at Wyoming a few years back. But a guy that can get his own shot, is a great spot-up shooter, and should be a really good player for TCU this upcoming season. Kind of reminds me of Trey Tennyson, except it seems like he has more of an ability to create his own shot and get his own quality looks, as Trey was more of a spot-up shooter. At number 2, the guy that Trey Tennyson helped bring to Fort Worth, Trezarian White, who the Frogs landed yesterday, almost 20 points a game, 7 rebounds a game. Your do-everything type of small forward, power forward, can shoot the 3, can space the floor, is a great rebounder. Jamie Plunkett, who covers the team for Horned Frog Blitz, said that he averaged 22 rebounds a game his senior year of high school, so somebody that can crash a glass. I'm really excited about the offseason that Jamie Dixon has put together. And there's a couple other transfers that I didn't mention here in this segment for the men, but Brendan Wenzel, I feel like, is going to be a really good player off the bench for TCU, coming over from Wyoming. Again, another guy who can shoot it. And then R.J. Jones, who they kind of took a flyer on, young player from Kansas State who didn't play much for the Wildcats this past year, but he was known as someone who could fill it up when he was in high school. And then finally, number 1, Haley Van Lith. Now, Haley last season, her production dipped at LSU. She averaged 11 points a game. But I feel like people are being a little dramatic about how much of a drop-off it was. Like, yes, she was very different. She was a different player. She wasn't in her natural position. She was playing point guard. She was kind of asked to lead that offense. But she still had a really good year. And at Louisville, she was the person that scored for them. I mean, she averaged 20 points a game in 2022, 14 points a game in 2021. She's a good shot creator. She can go get buckets. Like, she's going to move over to that shooting guard position where she's more comfortable this upcoming season. And this was a huge get for Mark Campbell, and it was really out of nowhere. I mean, you hadn't heard many rumors about it, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, she's going to come play for TCU. That's crazy. So outstanding job this offseason by that coaching staff, recruiting at a high level. And those are your top 5 basketball transfers so far. I think both teams are pretty much done, though. You might see 1 or 2 more players being added, but I think it's going to be more rotation players than, true stars who are going to be asked to score the basketball. We'll wrap things up when we come back. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. At 1:30 in Stillwater, Oklahoma today, TCU men's tennis will take on Kentucky in the quarterfinals of the NCAA tournament, the Elite Eight, essentially. Good luck to David Rodini and his squad. If they win, they'll most likely take on Ohio State in the Final Four. And Ohio State is the team that took them down in the indoor championships this year. They've got a stacked roster. But once again, TCU men's tennis making a push to try to win a national championship. And they're at least there at the final site, which is an outstanding job by Coach and his team. So good luck to them as they try to take down Kentucky today and make it to the Final Four. In baseball news, Peyton Tolle is going to start tonight. Now, if you've been watching the weather, I would say keep an eye on the TCU baseball account today, because there's a decent chance this game gets delayed. I know there's a lot of rain in the area in Fort Worth this morning and into the afternoon, but it's supposed to be a 6 o'clock first pitch. Cole Klecker moving back into the rotation on Friday night. So we'll see how that goes. Cole's been better lately. Hopefully mentally he can slide back in the rotation and that won't really affect him at all. And then Saturday's TBA. But I did see both D1 Baseball and Baseball America had TCU in the NCAA tournament in their latest Field of 64 projections. Now, they had them as a 3 seed, but they didn't have them on the bubble necessarily. They weren't like the last 4 teams in. So I still think it's really imperative that they take 2 out of 3 from West Virginia this weekend, but maybe they're not as close to the bubble as I thought they were going into yesterday. We'll have to see how that plays out. But supposed to get underway at 6 o'clock today. I'd say keep an eye on things, though, because the weather might be a factor tonight going into tomorrow. We'll be back tomorrow. It's Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day.